And exactly a week from today, students in Columbia will start those online classes. This comes after the Board of Education voted to switch to virtual amid those spikes in coronavirus cases. To talk about that, we are joined this morning by CPS Superintendent Dr. Peter Stiepelman. Thank you so much for being on with us again this morning.
Hi, good morning.
When can students and parents expect to get an understanding of what the virtual plan will look like?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. I'm going to answer it. There's one slight little thing to maybe fix is that yesterday we announced that we had 52 of our employees that had tested positive or were quarantined. I'm not sure if I heard you say 79 or something like that, so I just wanted to make sure. And that's important because when you talk about staffing, you actually have to have a staff to be there to teach. And last week we had 30 staff members be quarantined 14 days and then 22 just yesterday. And so that's a real problem for us. When you're talking about a 44.6 positivity rate in our community, this is widespread community transmission that we're talking with. And so when we talk about having to move online, we've seen districts all across the nation say that they're going to be out for the entire semester. And our board was really thoughtful. Everybody wants to be back. All of us, myself included. However, right now, based on the positivity rate, based on the climbing daily rates that we see in our community, it isn't responsible. The science just doesn't add up. And so what we're going to do is take this month of September to see, do we flatten the Columbia curve? Are we able to see that things are getting better? So to your question, when will families know? They need to know now, right? I mean, families have been talking about needing to have, to know what the plan is. So they now know exactly what the plan is. And then so we're going to be getting out information continuously to our parents and to our teachers as well, because our teachers know that they have to now pivot one more time from all in-person to in-person hybrid to now online. And that's not easy, but I'll tell you, we have the most amazing educators and professionals in our school district, and they'll make it happen.
That's great to hear. We've also heard some concerns that some CPS families have about internet speed and whether hotspots will solve that issue. What about other technology like laptops or some other devices? Is the district ready to get off to a fast start next week with that technology?
Yeah, so that is really a credit to Arla Monroe, who's our Director of Tech Services, who very early on made sure that we were able to have a device for every child should we ever have to go completely virtual. And we always anticipated that there would be days where classrooms would be quarantined based on the fact that somebody tested positive in that classroom or in that building. And so we have pre-K through 12 one-to-one devices. The pre-K is really just for 1 day a week when we send some learning home in a hybrid situation. So we would never say that we really want early learning kids or early childhood kids on devices like that. And so, yes, we have the hardware to do it. And then you asked about hotspots. And you're right. Hotspots are not the be-all and end-all. They're not the answer to it all. But what we do know is that for those who don't have internet connection, who can't afford internet connection, that we've had the ability to step in. But a big thank you goes to the Boone County Commission, who stepped forward and said, we'll get you those hotspots. And they did that for all the school districts in Boone County. And so really, they took the CARES money, they identified what we needed, and then they helped us pay for those. So those hotspots have already come in. We've distributed them to all the Boone County schools. And so we'll be using them. We have a decision tree to help us kind of decide how do we first deploy, who takes priority in terms of getting those hotspots. I have internet connection at my house. Would I like more internet connection at my house? Potentially, because I have 3 boys who are now going to have to learn online. And so I don't get priority, obviously. It's for our free reduced lunch families, for those families that don't have reliable internet connection. However, we also know that some just don't have enough in terms of its robustness or its ability. And so we're looking at those actually this morning. We've done a survey. We know about 450 families who have said that they need it. About half of those are families on our free reduced lunch program. And then the others have really made it a good case to be made for being eligible for a hotspot.
What is it going to take to get students back in the classroom come the end of September when the board looks at those numbers again?
Yeah, super question, because obviously the board makes a decision and then everybody says, so is that it? I mean, what are the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of our return? So there are a couple. One, I heard in your coverage a little bit earlier about a vaccine. That is going to be super important in terms of a return. But I would also talk about the fact that WashU and Yale University have both been showing a real promise in terms of a very quick test. So if we can get some quick testing that can be done in a school as children arrive, that can really help us in terms of maintaining good health and safety of our children and our staff. as they return. I'd say the third thing, and that's pretty much the easiest one, is that we have to flatten the Columbia curve. And so as we see the positivity rate begin to drop, which is what we are hopeful for, so the newest health order, it is our anticipation and hope that by having the bars closed a little early is going to help us reduce our cases in our community. Now, that certainly was the case in Boise, Idaho. So if you look at Boise, Idaho, when they opened their bars, they saw an incredible spike. When they closed them and returned back to an earlier stage, they were able to begin their recovery. And so I'm hopeful that will happen here as well. So we have to have those positivity rates decline. And then just in terms of the case rates need to decline as well. I can tell you that our Board of Education was really thoughtful. They decided that they weren't going to make a decision in terms of putting us online all semester that they've seen in other communities, but rather say, look, I want you to take this next month to see how the numbers come down. We need you to come back and get our kids back online and going. But then they also said they want us to look for everything we can possibly do to get those early learners, kindergarten through second grade, back in buildings in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in much smaller class sizes, whether it's spreading them out among multiple buildings, but to provide that offering to families to get kindergarten through second grade. Those are those early years. That's where they're building those habits to learn how to read, but then also those non-academic habits of knowing how to do school. And so those are the kinds of things we're going to be thinking about as we try to return. That's our goal. Nobody wants to do this on a long-term basis.
Understandable. And you also said in the board meeting last night that teachers had been working hard all summer to be ready for virtual learning. Will teachers be working virtually? Will they be in the buildings? And what kind of access will students have to them? What will that look like next week?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question. So yes, they have been working incredibly hard to write curriculum. They have about 6 weeks worth of written curriculum ready to do online, or if we were in the hybrid model. And so we feel good about that. One of the things that we can also expect is that teachers have asked to be able to go into their classroom, because this has not been a stay-at-home order. So we're not saying that teachers can't use their classrooms. In fact, we would encourage them to do that. And so there are going to be teachers who are going to want to use our Wi-Fi, but also just the materials in their classroom to be able to teach. And so you can expect that a daily lesson, there's this term synchronous, and then there's another term asynchronous, right? Synchronous means that that children log on and they're teaching in real time. And that's what we're aiming to do, is a synchronous model. So students have a daily schedule. We shared that with the board last night. I'll upload that to our website today so that families can kind of see a sample of what that day looks like. Everything from the early meeting and the class meeting at the beginning of the day, to the reading materials that would be during a certain period of time, to writing. I'm looking at it only because it's on my sheet, but in terms of science, social studies, and all the other types of intervention and small group time. And so we are going to try to do a real, regular day. Those who remember the spring remember that we made every effort to try to catch up kids who had been failing and then provide enrichment opportunities for kids online. This has to be very different from that. So a regular grading periods, regular teaching, regular instruction.
So we know you already took student teachers out of the classrooms. What will this look like in a virtual learning model?
Yeah, so when you talk about what will student teaching look like, it's probably a better question for the College of Education. But what can I tell you is that we've had phase 1, phase 2, that's your sophomores and your juniors, that we had already identified to say, it's probably not in everyone's best interest for them to be in our buildings. And so we had already agreed that we would have them support our online learning and our online teachers. So this is also now for those seniors who we have regularly considered part of our faculty, because they're in our buildings almost their entire senior year. But what we've noticed is that we've had a couple of cases where students tested positive, and then that presented a risk for them, but also for our own faculty. And so we have put in our plan that we're going to have fewer visitors, and so we're going to do that. We're going to look to make sure that, in their best interest as well, that we're going to find opportunities for them to do some online teaching to help and support our online programs so they can get those student teacher hours in.
And we also heard some discussion last night about still having special education students in person. Was there a decision made on that, and what can these families expect?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, because I think it got lost a little bit in the conversation because for obvious reasons. So one of the things that Elise Munces, who's our Director of Special Education, our Chief Equity Officer, Carla London, they've been really working hard to look at where are there possibilities for us to have the 5-day program for children who are in district-wide programs. So we're talking about some of our most exceptional learners, children where virtual learning would have been really almost impossible for them. And so we're going to move forward and be able to talk with families about, for our children who regularly are in a self-contained daily program, that they'll have access to that full day program. The only thing that would change that is if we had a stay-at-home order, and we're not in that. Right now, we're able to do this for our children and our families of our special ed children.
That's great to hear. And will you be doing some sort of food program similar to what you did in the spring to help out families?
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we had already been planning based on the fact that we were looking at an in-person hybrid was to have Monday and Wednesday food deliveries to families. What our Director of Nutrition Services has done, has worked very closely with our Chief Equity Officer as well, is to make sure that we have either two options. One, a grab and go, where families could come up to the school and get food that for their children, or that we'll continue to have those bus routes being run throughout the fall to make sure that, or at least throughout September while we're in a virtual setting, to make sure that families have those reliable food source, because you can't learn if you're hungry.
That's definitely understandable. And finally, what will happen for school activities and sports now that you're going all online? Will those still be allowed to go on?
Yeah, and so I think it's important not to make a blanket statement about all activities, including athletics and those types of things. Some can be done virtually, no problem. But also, we've worked really closely with the health department using their guidelines for athletics. Our protocols that have been put in place, our athletic director, David Egan, our fine arts director, James Melton, have worked really hard to make sure that we're following those protocols and doing the best that we absolutely can to make sure that kids and adults are safe. Now, we did hear from a family who was very disappointed about marching band. We had a football game. We were only allowed to have 300 in the entire stadium. And so we made the decision to disqualify marching band for being a part of that, because you have 100 students in the marching band. And so they would have exceeded our ability. However, they deserve, that's where I found sanctuary, was in fine arts, I know, believe it or not. And so for me, it's important for us to try to find activities and opportunities for our marching band, as well as those athletics that are not high contact, to be able to find ways for them to continue to participate. It's through those activities that keep kids connected to school. And so you're more likely to get all of your online learning done if you've got a coach or a band director saying, you got to get your stuff done if you're going to participate.
That definitely makes sense. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have this morning. Thank you again for being on with us this morning, Dr. Stiepelman.